Hey there, listener. Welcome to the Deliberate Scribe podcast, where we help Christian writers be deliberate and redemptive in their writing, thinking, and living. But I hope to add value to everybody's lives. Okay, I'm extremely tired because this is the third day of the Israel-Iran war, and I haven't slept much because 2 nights now already I had to scoop my children out of bed in the middle of the night to bring them to race them to the bomb shelter. The first night I actually had to do that twice or 3 times even. And then we said, you know what, the kids will just sleep in the bomb shelter so that we don't have to run anymore. But you can still imagine that with such heightened state of awareness that sleeping is hardly an option anymore. Airplanes are flying overhead all the time, so all that noise adds to a certain amount of stress that makes it difficult to sleep. But still, I don't want to let that keep me from recording this podcast for you, because I don't want this terror group to have such a disruptive effect on my life. Because if they will manage to destroy my daily life, they will win. So we, the people of Israel, are just continuing on our business. And we will sing, we will dance, we will do everything we do best. So this episode is about character. What a character is and how to build one. And how to present one on the page. And also, I end with a few notes on how to use character in nonfiction. Because this is the second episode of a series on fiction writing techniques. I used to specialize in nonfiction, but I made a decision to, as a coach, work with fiction as well as nonfiction. But first, I would like to invite you to subscribe to my newsletter if you want to receive good advice to help you finish your book and add depth to it. Go to yourbeststory.net, yourbeststory.net. You will find a subscription form there. And if you subscribe, you can also get a free coaching call with me, 1 hour, especially for you, in which I help you carve a path forward with your writing and your book. No strings attached. Okay, a new age has started, you could say. AI is here to stay, and those who know my podcast or follow me on social media know that I don't like it one bit. So how can we writers push back? I think authenticity is the most important ingredient for good writing. Personal stories is what we need. But also, if we can use other people to tell personal stories, we are also winning, because we can have a character have experiences. We can describe the experiences that a character have, and we can do that as writers because we know how it feels. We know how it feels to have the wind on your skin. We know how it feels, at least most of us know how it feels to receive a first kiss. Some of us know how it is to get married. Some of us know how it is to experience a first wedding night, or how it is to become a parent, or how it is to go bankrupt or get divorced. These are all experiences, happy ones or sad ones. If we can share those experiences through a character, either a fictional one or a real one, we can create an experience in the reader. And I believe that that is something AI will never truly be capable of. It will, at least in my point of view, always be fake. An AI will never have those experiences, ever. And people, writers, will have those experiences. So if we build characters that take our readers on a journey that the reader can really experience, really feel along, cry along, laugh along, then you add some value. That is some value that AI cannot take away from us. So that's why I also want to be very deliberate with my character development. That is how we call it in fiction, of course. In nonfiction, I would rather call it character discovery, because in nonfiction you can, of course, not make anything up, but you can really pay attention to how people are behaving, what they are doing, what they are saying, etc., and that way represent a true living person. So first, what is a character actually? Well, actually it is quite a hard question what a character is. A character is not really a person whom you can know, yet you have the feeling that you do. When you first meet a person in a book, very much like the impression you get when you meet a normal person, a real existing person, you pretty soon begin to get the feeling that you know this character. And that is because the mind does a lot of filling in. You get a few brushstrokes, as those are often called. A few brushstrokes of what the character is, who the character is, what the character does, what the character looks like, and your mind begins to fill out the rest. And that is also in real life like that. When you meet a person, you only get some impressions, and based on that, you begin to construct an impression of that person. You begin to automatically guess what the background of that person is. And an image begins to form in our minds. We see brushstrokes of the personality, and our imagination does the rest. And in real life, as well as in good fiction, it are the special details that jump out at us. And it can be clothes, it can be the features of the face, the sound of the voice, the accent, the attitude that a person has. Those are really broad brushstrokes that we see and hear, and based on that, we make a guesstimation, if you will, of what the character is like, or what this person is like. We compare it with the templates that we have in our minds, and that helps us flesh out the rest of the character. In our minds, immediately this person becomes a whole character. So we base our knowing of that person or the character on the brushstrokes we see. And that is like that in real life as well as in writing. So a character, I conclude, is the choice of brushstrokes we consistently make on the page. So we need to make a decision as writers. How much do we give the readers and how much do we leave to the reader's imagination? And this is, for a goodly part, the style of the writer. Some writers have the tendency to be very descriptive and take the time to mention every aspect of the character and make sure that the reader has a full picture. And other writers, and I am one of them, tend to use fewer details and much less description, because I believe that less description brings more mystery. There's more left for gossip, so to say. I'm not the gossipy kind of person, and you don't have to use gossip in your story, of course, but there is more space for gossip, the space for that mystery that people find interesting. But if you use more details and more elaborate characterization, you have greater clarity. It is more clear for the reader what the person is about and what the character looks like, etc. But it has less of this mystery, of course. And another thing is that it sets the reader to work. It demands more of the reader, because the reader needs to construct a mental picture bit by bit based on the description that you as a writer give. And that is hard work. It demands that the reader holds all these different pieces in the working memory and then construct a picture from that. But if you take one telling detail or two telling details instead, you'll create an instant mental picture, and that is processing fluency. Immediately, the reader gets this one telling detail and the rest of the picture forms automatically, probably also based on this template that we have. And that means that the reader has to do much less work. So that brings me to the question, is deep description actually necessary? Well, I think not. Because how well do we know anybody, actually? The people from our work, or even our own mothers. How much do we actually know of the backstory of our mothers? Maybe not even so much. Do we know what is going on inside of her? There's a lot of mystery there. There's a lot of mystery surrounding the persons whom we actually know up close. So if we know only so much of the persons to whom we are close, why would we want our readers to know our characters any better than that? So it is not necessary to be so elaborate. We don't need the reader to understand the character as much as we as writers need to understand the character. There is a difference between the reader and the writer in this regard. The writer typically knows what the backstory of a character is. A writer typically knows what the psychology of a character is, or the childhood issues, or you name it. Like God knew everything about my mother. I hardly knew anything about my mother, really. I knew her very well, yet there were so many things I didn't know. And God knew all those things. And we as writers need to know in a very similar way everything about our characters. Everything that is relevant for the story, at least. I think it was Elie Wiesel who said that a book of 200 pages actually contains 800 pages All these 800 pages of information, of knowledge, of insights and that sort of thing are all written somewhere, but eventually the book is only 200 pages long. And actually all of these 800 pages are in those 200 pages. Those 800 pages is the stuff that you need to know to be able to write the 200 pages. So yes, as writers, we need to know much, much, much more. But the reader doesn't need all that. The reader needs brushstrokes. The reader needs mystery. And there is then also the challenge for writers. We need to resist the urge to explain. We need to restrain ourselves from trying to tell everything we would like to tell. We're just so proud of all the backstory that we made up and all the psychology. It's just super awesome. When I'm writing backstory, I'm on fire. I love that. And I would love to write that all, create dialogues in which all these details show. But I need to resist the urge to explain everything because the mystery will disappear and the pace will slow down too much and the reader will get bored. And the number one rule I always remind students of is don't bore your readers. But it is super important for us to know all these things, to know the psychology and the backstory and everything there is to know about a character, because that creates consistency. So we need to use all that information to create a consistent voice for a character and a consistent story and consistent behavior. But RUE, resist the urge to explain, until it is relevant. There might come a moment that it becomes relevant to begin to explain this backstory. Then still I would go for hiding the backstory in believable dialogue, so that it will not be obtrusive. Not like, okay guys, sit down for a little lecture now. We are now going to learn what happened in Jimmy's life before this book started. That would be boring. So I always try to hide it somewhere. Until it becomes relevant to actually mention the backstory, what we should see all the time from everything our characters do is the result of the backstory. All the attitudes that are caused by the backstory, that is what matters. And therefore we need to know that backstory very, very, very well. Because otherwise our character might start doing things suddenly that are completely out of character. And from this backstory we find the motivation for everything that the character does. So even if it takes you a very, very long time to write the book, far in the process you can still be consistent because you know the character, you know the backstory, you know the frame of reference that this character is pulling everything out of. Everything they say, everything they experience, everything, all the behaviorisms, all their attitudes, all their points of view, they all draw from that well that you have created already. Therefore, you must understand your character so that your character becomes consistent and true. I can give you a little example of how little a reader actually needs to get an immediate mental image of a character. I'm going to give just a few brushstrokes, and I bet you will see the person that I'm talking about. Imagine a man with octagonal sunglasses and a grey beard. It's just one brushstroke, you could say. But I bet you see this guy now. Not everybody will see him in exactly the same way, but you will see the person. You now see the person with the octagonal sunglasses and the grey beard. And if I then give him one sentence, so he points his finger at you and he says the following. They're coming for us, dude. Big Brother's here. Now suddenly you see a life. You get an impression of what the life of this guy looks like. And your imagination fleshes out the rest. You suddenly have an idea of the background of this guy, where he comes from, what kind of social environment this man comes from. So and that will be a first impression, a few brushstrokes giving this first impression, and you immediately have a picture in your mind. And then from there you can get a better picture of him through his behavior rather than character description. So as a writer you can now have him do something, have him say certain things, and through those actions show what this character is. And this way you can get away with hardly any description. And because these brushstrokes are so specific and so typical, your mind will have no trouble filling in the rest. And then from there on, of course, if you add more details, you might surprise your reader with that the person is just a little bit different from expected. And of course you keep building and so. But this first impression and this concrete image that the reader can start working with that creates this immediate image in the mind of the reader allows you to continue the story without interrupting it at all, and the reader will stay in the emotional flow of the story and from there get to know the character better. And the character will not feel flat because the imagination fills in the rest. This first impression with these few brushstrokes, Blake Snyder, the film script writer and the author of Save the Cat, calls this the limp and the eye patch. By giving a character that just comes in a limp and an eye patch, well, you immediately see a pirate walking around now, you can create an effective immediate image in the mind of your reader that also will help your reader remember the character. So every time the name of that particular character shows up, this limp or eye patch shows up as well. I have, for example, in my fantasy book, a lizard-like creature who, as a family trait, has a tuft of black hair on his head. Well, most of the other lizard-like creatures, somdings I call them, have no hair at all, just green lizard skin on their heads, and he has a tuft of black hair, which also gives him the nickname Black Tuft among his friends. And giving him this little limp or eye patch, the reader will remember this character. And if I give this character then one typical thing to say or thing to do that shows the character, then I don't need to do much else. And I can let the character do the work. By just letting the character be themselves, they can just help us fill in all the blanks. We don't need to describe anything more. Another character that I have, a librarian, is sort of an owl who has round glasses on its beak. It has a tendency to slide down and this owl has to push it back up. And so every time this librarian is mentioned, the reader will see that particular picture. Okay, so it is a work in progress. I don't know if I'm going to keep these limps and eye patches. I might come up with something better, but these serve as good examples of how you can use a limp or an eye patch to give a character something very specific that will anchor the character in the reader's brain. And from there on, you can continue working. So where you go from there determines whether you want to have a really round or flat character. This is also a matter of style. Not every character has to be round. There are many examples of characters who never change, who are really flat. And there's also a bit of a controversy whether there is such a thing as a flat character, because we fill in the rest in our minds. As soon as we see a character, we have all kinds of assumptions, and we place this character in a certain, well, as I called it just now, a template. We turn that character, even though the character itself on the page is flat, we turn it into a round character by making up all the other stuff ourselves, by just assuming that other stuff is there. It is only just not mentioned. That is also a way of looking at it, that flat character is not that the character itself is flat, but the way it is described is flat. So then there's the question, do you want to add more dimensions or do you want to leave this character so thinly on the page? Well, the backstory forms motivation, as I just said. And more complicated characters demand more complicated backstories to make sure that the reader understands why they are doing the things they are doing. In many cases, especially in a story where the character is doing some mysterious stuff, it might be an absolute necessity to show way more of the backstory. Unless you want to go for a really mysterious character. Sometimes having a character do inexplicable stuff and indeed not give any kind of motivation for it can actually add a lot of mystery and suspense. But in general, you want to make sure that everything that your character does is motivated, and therefore you need to have that backstory as a writer and often also share that backstory. So you need to understand the psychology of your character. As Barry Morrow, as quoted in Creating Unforgettable Characters by Linda Sager, says, "Half of writing is psychology. There is a consistent core or a consistent unity to behavior. People don't act willy-nilly. To become human behavior, you have to know what people will do in most situations. People don't act without a reason. Every action has motivation and intention. And therefore, knowing the character's psychology, which is related to the backstory, of course, is super important. I don't know if you know Barry Morrow, but he is the kind of person who can know this. He is the story writer for Bill. That's an old series about a very peculiar man. Very interesting. I have read the backstory of how this film series came to be, and it is super interesting. But he also created Rain Man. And Rain Man is a famous movie about an autistic person. So Barry Morrow knows how important psychology in a story is, because his stories are all about psychology. Okay, and that's where I'm going to put a cliffhanger, because these recordings ended up being way too long for one podcast. I cut it in two, and so next time we're going to talk more about character psychology and internal conflict, some practical guidance on how to plan these things, and what this means for nonfiction writers. So it's going to be a very interesting episode next week. As a reminder, you can go to my website yourbeststory.net and subscribe to my newsletter and get a 1-hour coaching session with me. I wish you a very blessed writing journey, and God bless you. Bye bye.